Harmony in the darkness. The final note lingered in the air of the dimly lit bar, a haunting melody that seemed to carry the weight of its creator's pain. 24-year-old Gabriel Torres sat motionless at the worn upright piano, his unseeing eyes fixed on nothing as the scattered applause of the Tuesday night crowd faded to silence. Once a rising star at Juilliard with dreams of Carnegie Hall, now he played for tips in a half-empty London pub, his world perpetually shrouded in darkness. "Same time tomorrow, Gabe?" asked Marco, the sympathetic owner who had given him this weekly gig 6 months ago, more out of pity than business sense. "Yeah," Gabriel replied without enthusiasm, his fingers still resting on the keys as if afraid to lose contact with the only part of his former life that remained. Same time tomorrow. 3 years had passed since the car accident that took his sight, but left him otherwise physically unharmed. A cruel joke of fate for someone whose identity had been built around reading music. The doctors called it traumatic optic neuropathy. Gabriel called it the end of everything. His white cane tapped methodically as he made his way to the bar, where Marco had set aside his usual glass of water. The door opened, letting in a momentary rush of cold autumn air. But Gabriel paid it no mind. New patrons were hardly unusual, though they rarely came for the music. "Bloody marvelous playing, that was," said a voice to his left. British, with a slight regional accent Gabriel couldn't quite place. "Your own composition?" "Yes," Gabriel answered curtly, not in the mood for conversation. "Thanks. Reminded me a bit of early Bernie Taupin and myself, before we got all flashy with the commercial stuff. Had that raw emotional quality, you know." Gabriel froze, his glass halfway to his lips. There was something hauntingly familiar about that voice, something he'd heard countless times through headphones during long practice sessions. It couldn't be, could it? "I'm Elton, by the way," the voice continued casually, as though he were any ordinary patron. "Elton John." The glass slipped from Gabriel's hand, shattering on the floor. The entire bar fell silent. I know who you are," Gabriel stammered, his heart racing. "I've been listening to your music since I was a kid." Elton laughed warmly. "Well, that makes me feel ancient. But listen, I meant what I said. Your playing, it's extraordinary. There's a depth there that can't be taught." "It doesn't matter anymore," Gabriel replied, bitterness creeping into his voice. "Can't exactly build a career when you can't read sheet music." A moment of silence passed, and Gabriel assumed the legend had moved on, uncomfortable with his bluntness. But then he felt a hand on his shoulder, steady and reassuring. "Meet me tomorrow at Abbey Road Studios, 2 o'clock. I have something I'd like to show you." "Show me?" Gabriel couldn't help the bitter laugh. "Not sure if anyone's told you, but I can't exactly see anything." "Some things don't require eyes to see," Elton replied cryptically. "Just promise you'll come." Before Gabriel could respond, Marco's excited voice interrupted. "Mr. John, it's an honor. Can I get you a drink?" "On the house, of course." As Marco pulled Elton away, Gabriel sat frozen, mind racing. Why would Elton John, of all people, take interest in a broken pianist playing in a neighborhood pub, and what could he possibly show someone who lived in perpetual darkness? Later that night, as Gabriel lay in his small flat, the sounds of London traffic filtering through thin walls, his phone rang. It was his sister Elena, the only family who hadn't given up on him after he'd pushed everyone away following the accident. "You'll never believe what happened," he told her, still in shock. "Try me," she replied, used to her brother's mood swings. "Elton John heard me play tonight. He wants me to meet him at Abbey Road Studios tomorrow." The silence on the other end lasted so long, he thought the call had dropped. "Elena?" "I'm here," she finally answered, her voice thick with emotion. "Gabe, this is it. The sign we've been waiting for. You have to go." "What's the point?" The familiar weight of resignation settled over him. "I'm not the pianist I was. I never will be again." "Maybe that's exactly the point," Elena replied softly. "Maybe you're meant to become something different now." As the call ended, Gabriel's fingers itched for the piano keys, a sensation he hadn't felt in months. For just a moment, something flickered in the darkness that had become his life, something that felt dangerously like hope. But hope was a luxury he'd learned to live without, because hope inevitably led to disappointment, and Gabriel wasn't sure he could survive being broken again. What he didn't know was that across London, in a luxurious hotel suite, Elton John sat at a grand piano, playing Gabriel's haunting melody from memory, wondering if tomorrow might change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. The taxi dropped Gabriel off at Abbey Road Studios precisely at 2 o'clock. His palms were sweating despite the cool October air, as he navigated with his cane toward the entrance, suddenly acutely aware of his worn jeans and faded sweater. What was he doing here? This was madness. "You must be Gabriel," a woman's voice greeted him at the door. "I'm Renee, Mr. John's assistant. He's waiting for you inside." She gently took his arm, guiding him through the hallowed halls where the Beatles, Pink Floyd, and countless other legends had recorded. Gabriel could sense the history in the air, or perhaps it was just his imagination filling the darkness with meaning. "Gabriel!" Elton's unmistakable voice boomed as they entered what must have been a recording studio. "Right on time. I was just telling David here about your remarkable playing." "David?" Gabriel questioned, his grip tightening on his cane. "David Foster," a new voice clarified. "Pleasure to meet you." Gabriel nearly stumbled backward. Elton John and David Foster, one of the most influential producers in music history, were both here, apparently waiting for him. This had to be some elaborate practical joke. "Please sit." Elton guided him to what felt like a piano bench. A Steinway, Gabriel realized as his fingers brushed the keys. Not just any Steinway, but one perfectly tuned, with the action adjusted to perfection. His fingers instinctively played a soft chord, and the rich tone resonated through him like an electric current. "I told David about what I heard last night," Elton continued. "That piece you played, it has something special. Raw emotion translated directly to music." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably. "It's just something I've been working on. Nothing formal." "That's precisely what makes it powerful," David interjected. "It's authentic, unfiltered. I'd like to record it," Elton stated simply. Gabriel's head snapped up. "What? Not me performing it," Elton clarified. "You. I want to produce an album of your compositions, with you performing them." Time seemed to stop. Gabriel's heart pounded in his ears as the implications crashed over him. That's impossible. I can't read music anymore. I can't see the engineer's cues. I can't." "Ray Charles couldn't see either," Elton interrupted gently. "Neither could Stevie Wonder. Different circumstances, yes, but the principle remains. Your disability doesn't define what you can create." "This isn't charity," David added, his tone businesslike. "We're not doing this as some inspirational human interest story. Your music deserves to be heard. Period." Gabriel's fingers trembled on the keys. "You don't understand. Before the accident, I was classical all the way. Competitions, conservatory, the whole route. What I play now is it's just pain, put to music." "Exactly," Elton said softly. "And what do you think connects people more than shared pain? That's what music is for, transforming suffering into something beautiful." A long silence followed, filled only by the gentle hum of the studio equipment. "Why?" Gabriel finally managed. "Why me? Why now?" Elton sighed, and Gabriel heard the rustle of clothing as the star presumably shifted position. 6 months ago, I had a health scare. Nothing I've made public, but it forced me to confront some things I'd been avoiding. Made me think about legacy in a different way." Elton's voice grew contemplative. "I've achieved everything I dreamed of and more, but I kept asking myself, what am I leaving behind beyond the hits? Who am I helping to find their voice?" Gabriel's hands slid from the piano. "And I'm your charity case." "No," Elton replied firmly. "You're a gifted artist who's lost his way. I know something about that. The difference is, I had Bernie to pull me back when I spiraled. Not everyone gets that lifeline." Before Gabriel could respond, the studio door opened. "Sorry I'm late," a new voice called out. Young, female, with an American accent. "Traffic was insane." "Ah, perfect timing," Elton said. "Gabriel, this is Layla Washington, an extraordinary voice coach who specializes in working with visually impaired musicians. Layla, this is Gabriel Torres." "Mr. Torres," Layla said, and Gabriel felt a hand extended toward him. After an awkward moment, she realized her error. "Sorry. Habit. It's nice to meet you." Gabriel muttered a greeting, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. They had planned this whole thing without even knowing if he'd show up. "I should go," he said suddenly, standing and nearly knocking over the piano bench. It's too much. I'm not ready." "Ready for what?" Elton challenged. "To be seen, to be heard, or to admit that you're still an artist despite what happened to you?" The words hit Gabriel like physical blows. "You don't know me," he said, his voice raw. "You heard me play one piece, in one bar, on one night. You have no idea what I've lost." "You're right," Elton conceded. "I don't know your specific pain, but I know what it's like to hate yourself so much you want to disappear. To feel like an imposter every time someone praises your work. To be surrounded by people but completely alone. The studio fell silent again. Gabriel stood frozen, his cane clutched tightly in his hand. 3 sessions, Elton proposed quietly. Give me 3 sessions in this studio. If after that you want to walk away, no one will stop you. I'll even pay for your taxi back to that pub so you can continue playing for disinterested drunks who don't deserve your talent. Gabriel let out a short, surprised laugh at Elton's bluntness. And if I say no, he asked, then you say no, Elton replied simply. And we both go on with our lives wondering what might have been. Gabriel's mind raced. The rational part of him screamed to leave now, to protect himself from inevitable disappointment. But somewhere deeper, in the place where music still lived despite everything, something stirred. 1 session, Gabriel countered. Today. And then I decide. Deal. Elton agreed immediately. David, shall we show him what we've been working on? As David began explaining their vision for recording techniques that would work with Gabriel's condition, Gabriel found himself wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or taken the first step toward reclaiming it. What he didn't yet realize was that Elton's interest in him went far beyond professional curiosity, because 30 years earlier, long before superstardom, a young Reginald Dwight had faced his own darkness, standing on a bridge much like the one Gabriel had contemplated only weeks before. The connection between them ran deeper than music alone, a truth Elton wasn't yet ready to reveal. 3 weeks into what had somehow become regular recording sessions, Gabriel sat at the Steinway, frustration mounting. They'd been working on the same passage for hours, and something wasn't clicking. Let's take 5, David Foster suggested after Gabriel's 8th consecutive mistake on the bridge section. Gabriel slammed his hands on the keys in a discordant crash. This isn't working. It's just a difficult section, Layla said encouragingly. Over the past weeks, she'd become not just his coach but something of a friend. The only person besides Elton who didn't tiptoe around his frustration. We can break it down further. No, Gabriel interrupted. I mean this. All of this. I'm not the musician you think I am. Before the accident, everything I played was someone else's composition. I interpreted. I didn't create. The studio fell silent. Gabriel could sense Elton and David exchanging glances. That piece I played in the bar, Gabriel continued, the truth finally spilling out. It wasn't something I composed for years. It just happened one night when I was at my lowest. I don't know how to recreate that. I don't know how to be what you want me to be. He expected disappointment, perhaps even anger at having wasted their time. Instead, he heard Elton's footsteps approaching, followed by the sound of the man settling onto the bench beside him. May I? Elton asked, gesturing toward the piano. Gabriel nodded, shifting slightly to make room. Elton's fingers began dancing across the keys, playing the opening notes of Your Song. But then he did something unexpected. He began to deconstruct it, breaking it down to its bare elements before rebuilding it in a minor key, transforming the hopeful love song into something melancholic and questioning. My first big hit, Elton explained as he played. Do you know how it came about? Bernie handed me lyrics. I sat at my mom's piano, and 30 minutes later, it was done. I didn't overthink it. I didn't question if it was good enough. I just played what the words made me feel. His hand stilled on the keys. That night in the bar. What were you feeling when you played that piece? Gabriel swallowed hard. That I wanted it to be over. All of it. Elton was quiet for a moment. I tried to take my life in 1975, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Middle of a swimming pool party at my house. Took a handful of pills, announced to everyone I was going to die, and jumped in the water. Gabriel turned toward Elton's voice, shocked. My grandmother found me when I was 11, Elton continued, after I'd tied a rope around a tree in our garden. Not to do it, mind you, just rehearsing, I suppose. Wondering if it was an option. Gabriel's throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because when I heard you play that night, I recognized the music of someone standing at the edge, Elton said simply. I've been there, more times than I care to admit. A heavy silence fell between them. How did you get past it? Gabriel finally asked. Who says I have? Elton replied with a sad laugh. Some days are still a battle, but I found purpose in the music, in connecting with people through it, in knowing that somewhere, someone was hearing exactly what they needed at exactly the right moment. Elton played a few soft chords. That's what your music did for me that night. It spoke directly to a part of me I usually keep hidden. Gabriel shook his head, overwhelmed. It's different for you. You're Elton John. I'm nobody. Bollocks, Elton retorted sharply. I was nobody once too. Just a chubby, insecure piano player named Reg who hated himself. The only difference between us is that I found my Bernie earlier than you found your voice. He stood from the bench. David, Layla, could you give us the room for a bit? After they left, Elton paced the studio floor. There's something I haven't told you. Something that might make you hate me. Gabriel tensed. What? I knew who you were before that night at the bar, Elton admitted. I saw a video of you performing Rachmaninoff at Juilliard 3 years ago. Brilliant technical performance. But nothing like what I heard in that pub. Gabriel's mind reeled. How? Your sister, Elton explained. Elena, she's been sending your recordings to everyone in the industry for months. Most people ignored them. I almost did too, until I actually listened. Gabriel felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Elena had promised she'd stop trying to fix his career months ago. So this whole thing, it was planned? Some kind of elaborate setup? The coincidence was manufactured, yes, Elton acknowledged. But everything else, my reaction to your playing, David's interest, this project, it's all genuine. Elena just made sure I found you. Gabriel stood abruptly, knocking the bench backward. I need to go. Gabriel! No, he cut Elton off. You had no right. None of you did. I'm not some project to be saved. That's not. Just stop, Gabriel snapped, fumbling for his cane. I trusted you. I actually started to believe that maybe, he broke off, choking on the words. The music is real, Elton insisted. What we're creating here is real, based on lies, Gabriel countered bitterly. Based on love, Elton corrected. Your sister loves you too much to watch you disappear. And he hesitated. I see too much of myself in you to walk away. Gabriel found his cane and moved toward where he remembered the door being. I'm done. Don't contact me again. Any of you. He made it as far as the corridor before the reality of his situation hit him. He had no idea how to navigate the unfamiliar building alone. Humiliation burned through him as he stood frozen, listening to Elton approach cautiously behind him. Let me at least call you a car, Elton offered quietly. Gabriel nodded stiffly, pride warring with practicality. The ride home passed in a blur. By the time Gabriel reached his flat, a cold fury had settled in his chest, directed not just at Elton and Elena, but at himself for believing, even briefly, that his life could be something more than the darkness he'd resigned himself to. He reached for his phone to confront Elena, but before he could dial, it rang in his hand. Unknown number. Hello? He answered warily. Gabriel Torres? An unfamiliar female voice. This is Dr. Amina Shah from London Vision Institute. I'm calling because we've reviewed your case, and there's a new procedure we believe might help restore partial vision in cases like yours. Gabriel sank onto his couch. How did you get my information? A pause. It was submitted by a sponsor for our experimental treatment program. An anonymous donor has covered all potential costs. The pieces clicked into place. Elton. It had to be. I'm not interested, Gabriel said flatly. Please remove me from your program. Mr. Torres, this is a rare opportunity. The success rate is... I said I'm not interested, Gabriel repeated, ending the call. He sat in the darkness of his apartment, the silence oppressive. Then, with deliberate movements, he made his way to the small keyboard in the corner, the one he'd barely touched since before the accident. His fingers found the keys, and without planning or thinking, he began to play. Not the haunting melody from the bar, but something new. Something raw and angry and heartbroken. The music poured from him like blood from a wound, each note an accusation against Elton, against Elena, against the universe that had taken his sight and left him fumbling in darkness. He played until his fingers cramped and tears streamed down his face. He played until the anger transformed into something else, something that felt dangerously like the creative passion he'd thought dead. He played until a melody emerged from the chaos, structured and powerful. When he finally stopped, dawn was breaking outside his window. Not that he could see it, but for the first time in 3 years, Gabriel felt a strange sense of clarity. Elton had been right about one thing. Gabriel had found his voice, not through Elton's guidance or Elena's machinations, but through the very betrayal that should have destroyed him. The realization left him with a choice more terrifying than any he'd faced since losing his sight: to retreat back into darkness, or to step forward into an uncertain light, on his own terms this time. What Gabriel didn't know was that across London, Elton sat at his own piano, listening to a recording of Gabriel's playing from their sessions, hearing something no one else could, the sound of someone on the verge of either breakthrough or breakdown. It was a sound Elton recognized from his own darkest days, and it haunted him with possibilities of both redemption and regret. 6 weeks passed without contact. Gabriel threw himself into his music with an intensity that both frightened and exhilarated him. The betrayal had unlocked something, a compositional voice that was entirely his own, neither classical nor contemporary, but somewhere in the liminal space between. Every night, he recorded rough versions on his phone, building a collection of raw musical sketches that told the story of his journey through darkness. His Tuesday night gigs at Marco's bar had transformed. What had once been background music now drew crowds who sat in reverent silence as he played, the power of his new compositions filling the small space. Word had spread, not that Gabriel was aware of it. On a particularly cold December evening, Gabriel finished his set to thunderous applause. As the crowd dispersed, Marco approached. "Someone here to see you," he said, an odd note in his voice. "Says it's important." Gabriel tensed, anticipating Elton's distinctive voice. Instead, a different voice spoke, one he'd never expected to hear again. "Your playing has evolved remarkably, Mr. Torres." Dr. Amina Shah, the vision specialist. "I told you I wasn't interested," Gabriel said flatly. "So did Beethoven's doctors, I imagine," she replied with dry humor. "Yet here I am. Not because of Sir Elton's request, though that initially brought your case to our attention. I'm here because you're a perfect candidate for our procedure. And as a doctor, I would be remiss not to make that clear to you directly." Gabriel's fingers curled around his cane. "Even if I wanted to, which I don't, I couldn't afford." "The funding remains available," Dr. Shah interrupted. "Anonymous or not, it's there. But that's not why I came tonight." She paused. "I came because I heard your music. Someone sent me a recording from this bar 2 weeks ago. It moved me to tears, Mr. Torres, and I thought to myself, imagine what this artist could create if he could choose darkness when it served the music, rather than being trapped in it permanently." Her words struck him with unexpected force. "The procedure has no guarantees," she continued. "Best case, partial vision returns. Shapes, light, perhaps some color. Worst case, no change. There's no risk of making your condition worse." Gabriel remained silent, mind racing. "Here's my card," she said, placing something on the table before him. "The offer stands whenever you're ready. No pressure, no obligation to the donor. Just an open door, should you choose to walk through it." After she left, Gabriel sat motionless, the doctor's card untouched on the table. "You going to call her?" Marco asked after a while. "I don't know," Gabriel admitted. "Everything's finally making sense through music. What if seeing again changes that?" Marco considered this. "My grandmother used to say that true artists create not because of their circumstances, but despite them. Your music comes from you, Gabe, not from the darkness." Later that night, unable to sleep, Gabriel made a decision. Not about the surgery, that would require more thought, but about something equally important. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Gabriel?" Elena answered on the first ring, her voice cautious. "Are you okay? I need you to do something for me," he said without preamble. "I need you to call Elton John." 3 days later, Gabriel sat in Abbey Road Studios once more, this time by his own choice. He'd arrived alone, insisting on navigating his way with minimal assistance, a small act of independence that felt significant. "Thank you for coming," Elton said, his usual exuberance subdued. "I'm not here for apologies," Gabriel replied. "I'm here because I have something to play for you. Something new." "I'm all ears," Elton said, and Gabriel could hear the smile in his voice. For the next 40 minutes, Gabriel played continuously, a suite of interconnected pieces that told the story of his journey from classical prodigy to darkness to something new entirely. He played with an assurance and emotional depth that silenced the room. When the final note faded, he heard a sound he hadn't expected. Elton John, crying. "That," Elton said, his voice thick with emotion, "is what music is supposed to do. Make people feel everything at once." Gabriel took a deep breath. "I want to record it. All of it. But on my terms. No manipulation, no charity narrative. Just the music speaking for itself." "Absolutely," Elton agreed immediately. "Whatever terms you want. And I want to call it Seeing Through Darkness," Gabriel continued. "Because that's what it's about. Finding clarity through pain." "It's brilliant," Elton said. "Truly brilliant. A moment of understanding passed between them. Two artists who'd found their way through different forms of darkness. "There's something else," Gabriel added. "I'm considering the procedure, the one at London Vision Institute." "Gabriel, that's wonderful," Elton stammered. "But I want to be clear. The music contract stands regardless. This isn't conditional on anything." "I know," Gabriel said, "and that's why I'm considering it. Because you helped me remember that I'm more than my sight, or lack of it. My music exists regardless. But maybe I don't have to stay in the dark forever." Over the next 3 months, magic happened in that studio. Gabriel's suite became Seeing Through Darkness, an album that defied categorization. Classical elements merged with contemporary emotion, technical brilliance with raw feeling. Elton produced but never interfered, understanding that Gabriel's musical vision needed no correction. 2 weeks before the album's scheduled release, Gabriel underwent the experimental procedure. The results were better than anyone dared hope. Not full sight, but a world of shifting light and shadow, of forms and movement, enough to navigate with reduced assistance, enough to see faces as blurred impressions, enough to witness sunrise as a gradual brightening, rather than simply feeling morning's warmth. The album release concert was held at Royal Albert Hall, Gabriel's choice, a venue he'd dreamed of playing since childhood. Sold out, with proceeds benefiting vision research and music education for disabled youth. Gabriel insisted on performing alone, though Elton waited in the wings, ready to join for the encore they'd secretly prepared. As Gabriel took the stage, the audience fell silent. Many knew his story by now. The classical prodigy who lost his sight, disappeared for years, then re-emerged with music that defied convention. What they didn't know was that tonight marked the first time he would perform while seeing shadows of his audience, perceiving the vastness of the hall that surrounded him. 3 years ago, Gabriel spoke into the microphone, his voice steady. "I lost my sight in an accident. I thought I'd lost everything. My career, my purpose, my future. I was wrong." He could sense the audience leaning forward, hanging on his words. "I discovered that sometimes we need to lose one way of seeing to discover another. Sometimes darkness is where we find our truest voice." He paused. "Tonight, I want to share what I found in that darkness. And I want to dedicate this performance to someone who heard me when I thought I was invisible, who reminded me that our greatest challenges often lead to our greatest gifts." Gabriel began to play the opening notes of Seeing Through Darkness. From his position, he could just make out the blur of thousands of phone lights swaying gently in the darkness of the hall, stars in a galaxy he was once again part of. For the encore, Elton joined him on stage for a dueling piano rendition of Your Song that transitioned seamlessly into Gabriel's bar melody, now transformed into something hopeful rather than despairing. The standing ovation lasted 15 minutes. Backstage afterward, Elena hugged her brother tightly. "I'm sorry I went behind your back," she whispered. "But I'm not sorry you're here." "I know," Gabriel replied, really seeing her face, blurred but beautiful, for the first time in years. "Neither am I." Later, as the crowds dispersed and the cleanup began, Gabriel and Elton sat alone in the now empty hall, two figures at twin pianos on the vast stage. "What next?" Elton asked. "World tour? Second album?" "The possibilities are rather endless now." Gabriel smiled, looking out at the shadowy outlines of the hall. "I was thinking of teaching, actually, starting a program for visually impaired musicians, showing them what's possible." Elton nodded approvingly. "The truest form of artistry, passing the gift forward." "I wouldn't be here without you," Gabriel said. "Not just the career opportunity. I mean here, alive. Your music saved me long before you found me in that bar. And then you saved me again by seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. That's the real magic of music," Elton replied softly. "It lets us see with our ears and hear with our hearts. Everything else is just details." As if drawn by the same invisible current, both men began to play. Not anything rehearsed, but an impromptu duet that spoke of shared understanding, of darkness weathered and light found, of two musical souls connecting across generations and circumstances. Outside Royal Albert Hall, the marquee lights illuminated the night. Gabriel Torres, Seeing Through Darkness, with special guest Sir Elton John. Inside, two pianists played as if there were no audience at all, not for fame or applause, but for the pure joy of creating sound from silence, light from darkness, hope from despair. And in that moment, both were truly, completely seen.